In life, you will always have the road ahead of you and the miles behind. It will come to you and end one day. For now, there is a bunch of highways ahead of you. They're vast and open. They can be straight or they can be full of twists and turns. You have to keep your eyes on them. Sure, it's good to reflect on the miles and the distance you've come, but don't get caught up in the rearview mirror looking back at everything, particularly the negative stuff. Don't do that with yourself, and especially don't do it with your parents. It's never too late to create something new with them.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. So excited to have you guys on the podcast today, listening in this new year. Starting off the new year with a guest that I'm excited to interview. It's Mike Liguori.
Okay.
I was like, wait a minute, the one thing I didn't talk about before starting to record. And Mike is the author of The Road Ahead and Miles Behind, which is a story of healing and redemption between father and son. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so happy you are. And as we were just kind of making sure our mics were working and headsets, you also shared that you are also a podcast producer. So share about that part of your life.
Yeah. So I've been in podcasting for about 6 years, and I am the founder and CEO of Live Your Truth Media. We are a podcast production company and also do marketing consulting for brands, influencers, and companies looking to build deeper relationships with their audiences through podcasting. So I've been doing that for a while. I love it. I've worked with everybody from Salesforce, T-Mobile, all the way down to the solopreneur that's looking to, possibly potentially leave their corporate job and wants to start, producing their own content and sharing their message and building a relationship with new followers and new fans and, essentially create a life for themselves.
I wish I would have known that information beforehand, but I'm happy I'm learning about it now.
Yeah, well, it's a time and place for everything,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. So now let's start off with sharing a little bit about where it is you live as well as where it is you grew up.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm the oldest of four boys. And I am also a former active duty Marine. I'm a veteran of the Iraq War. I served from 2004 to 2005 for my first tour, and then 2005 to 2006 for my second tour. I ended up doing 4 years in the Marine Corps total from 2002 to 2006. So you can't imagine that if you do the math on that, I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. For a lot of young men and women at that time frame who are in that time frame who are looking for purpose and what to do next after high school, whether it be college or to go get a job, I was one of the very many people that day who found out that there was a call to arms and a call to service when that day happened. And so instead of going to play college football, and go to go to the route that I had as an 8-year-old, wanting to play at the University of Notre Dame, growing up as a Catholic, as a young Catholic man in the Bay Area, and wanting to go play football at Notre Dame, and probably watching the movie Rudy more times than I could possibly imagine. I saw that there was a call for me to go serve in the military. And my family actually has a rich history of military service. And so for me, it was feeling like I was fulfilling a legacy for part of my family, and also was something for me that was very strong. It was very polarizing to be a part of that first wave of men and women who stood outside the recruiting offices. And no joke, probably when I went in within that first week after 9/11, there was a line out the door, and every single branch of men and women who were looking to serve. So, um, I guess we'll just drop in there. We'll just go
W-
there.
Well, no, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for serving this
Mhm.
country and the people that are in it and that are in
Yeah,
it. So thank you. Now, with that comes a lot of different emotions having served in active duty.
yeah.
The emotions that come when you return, all these different,
Mhm.
yeah, gosh, I mean, PTSD is very prevalent. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that within your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So after 2 tours of duty, I came home and found that civilian life was much harder for me to deal with than it was a war zone. And for some of you out there who are not connected to military service members, and some of you that are, the experiences that men and women have when they serve overseas is unique to them, to those individuals. It is very hard for a lot of people to understand. And when men and women come home after seeing the horrific side of human nature, you almost want to avoid it and you almost want to bury it. And you don't really want to confront and deal with it. And for me, I didn't know how to confront and deal with it. I ended up stuffing it away, thinking like, I'm fine. I'm going to go to college and get a degree and I'm going to make a ton of money in software sales and everything's going to be okay. Well, it wasn't, because in 2007, after I completed my freshman year, I got a letter from the Bush administration basically saying, you have been recalled to go back for a third tour to Iraq. And the moment I got that newsletter in the middle of my campus, right around noon where kids break, here I am, this former Marine combat veteran, surrounded by 18, 19-year-old kids who did not go to the military. And I had a mental breakdown in campus. I started sweating, was paranoid, was anxious, depressed, cocktail of emotions completely happening for me. And I went home immediately, didn't talk to anybody, panicking. And I remember I was driving incredibly fast. And I went home and locked myself in my house. And I said, I am not coming out ever again. And I remember my mom came home and I told her what happened. And she said, there's no way in heck we are going to get you to come back. You go back over there. So a couple days went by, a couple weeks went by. I'm not feeling like myself. I am completely I'm just not in a balance at all. And what ends up happening is that I decide to finally go to the VA and go get help. And that day I got diagnosed with complex PTSD from combat. And I have to tell you that changed my life forever. It changed my viewpoint. It changed the way that I saw the world. And most importantly, it changed the way that I saw myself. And it was very hard for me to be able to connect to people, for people who have experience with PTSD, whether they individually have it or they know somebody that does. Avoidance of eye contact is a big thing that happens, and it's usually come from the fear of intimacy. And that for me was one of the biggest things that plagued me. It plagued me in my romantic relationships, it plagued me in my friendships, even plagued me with my own family. The avoidance of eye contact as a symbolism of the avoidance of intimacy. And it all stemmed from the fear of losing them, not wanting to get too close, because in the military, you have compassion completely ripped from you because you have a job to do. There is no room for love and compassion and empathy. It's just not taught. And rightfully so. You are asked to do a job. And sometimes, and most of the time, that job is required for you to not have emotions, but rather to um, do what's necessary and what's required.
As I'm taking that in because it's so much. And as you were saying, the part of fear of intimacy, that's the first thing I thought. It's like, well, it
Mm,
has to be the fear of losing someone and how that impacts someone that's in a war zone, seeing people die, that it's like, wait, I just had lunch with this guy this or today, and now they're gone. Or I just shared my deepest secrets and emotions to this individual, and now they're no longer here. So I can see how that could play a part. And like you said so perfectly, that everybody's experience will be different. Just like with grief, everyone's experience is unique, and you cannot necessarily say you understand what you've gone through, but of course, you can relate to some extent. So, going to the VA and being with other people that you could connect with in some way because they had experienced something similar to you, how was that for you in your journey? Because there's a grief of there's huge grief in that aspect
Yeah.
of having served it, not only because you've experienced people dying, that part of the grief, but the part that you are no you know, you're leaving something behind, and like you said, you didn't even know how to act in the real world after being back. So share with that how that support of being with others that connect in your experience shaped you and helped you.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said, to go back to the experience thing. One of the things that I work with a lot with my clients and in terms of the executive consulting side and working with founders and entrepreneurs is one of the things is that is really embracing and having them embody their own experience of life, which means essentially you have to give yourself a chance and give yourself space in your life to be human. And for me, a lot of the things that I would say that caused me pain was not being able to create space for the human side, for the human experience, right, of war, and not being able to feel like that I had to bear all this weight and responsibility on my own and play this like lone wolf role where basically nobody understands me. I'm just a guy that served in the military. How could anybody want to connect with me because they would never understand? And when I was able to identify that the things that got me through the war was not that of my training, it was the shared misery of being out in a war zone 10,000 miles away from home with another guy who was also as miserable 10,000 miles away from his home. And we both had something to frankly complain about. And it was nice. But when you get home and you're in normal day to days, American life, it's safe. And there were tons of things that I could complain about, but it wasn't the same. I mean, frankly, I missed my friends. I missed those times that we had. There was a peace and a comfort to it, and despite all the chaos that was around. But during my healing process, I found that it is so important that in any transition of life, that we must have somebody that we can relate to and somebody that we can integrate with. So at any transition, whether it's you're going through a death, you're going through a divorce, or even if you're going through a rebirth from a death, and that could be an ego death, it is very important for you to find a community or a tribe that you can connect to, and especially military veterans. Military veterans need to have space where there's other people there that know exactly what it means to be a combat veteran and to integrate back into society. When you talk even from the gender aspect, right? Men and women. Men need to have groups of other men to go be men with, to talk about things that men deal with. And the same thing with women. Women need to go do girls' trips. Women need to be together in community. Women need to share experiences with each other. And I'm a big proponent and advocate of that, right? And not just from the veteran sense, but in romantic relationships, in friendships, just in life. Whatever stage of life you're in, it is very important for you to find a place where you can softly land and you can be in that support system. And for me, the the groups of people that I met that had military experiences was such a profound experience for me. It made things easier. It made me feel like I wasn't alone. And the most important thing was is that I could grieve the death of my friends. And I was very fortunate actually to not lose anybody in my unit during my tours of duty. But I actually lost more friends when I came home to drugs, alcohol, suicide, you name it. And so that to me weighed on me, survivor's guilt. I could have saved them. I could have done something. And that weighed on me a lot, but I was finally able to overcome that through community and tribe. of people that understand what it means to be a veteran and deal with those experiences.
I love the phrase you said, you need a soft landing, that
Yeah.
little kind of cushion that in
Mhm.
between, something that just kind of eases that transition. Again, it doesn't, all these transitions in life are part of life. We're going to have these emotions, but something that just makes it just a tiny bit,
Yeah.
less rough would be the case. And these friends that you lost when you got back, these were friends you were in combat with even just from the PTSD itself and all that, that they died either by suicide or drugs.
Yeah, I would say just, just to not make any sort of speculation, because it could have not been PTSD at
From
all. It
that.
could have
Mhm.
just been like, I just don't want to be here anymore.
Right.
And that's a very common thing for people who see a lot of really tough stuff in part of the human experience. Trauma is obviously a big topic of conversation out there in society. You see it a lot. Um, I had a dear friend of mine tell me that he thinks the word of 2023 is going to be trauma and the embracing of that. And I thought that was so interesting to hear that. So I'll digress from that point, but simply for me is without speculation, I'll never know why in my life for fact why my friends went the way that they did. I can only embrace the fact that they're okay now, even though they're not here in the physical presence. They're okay, and I don't have to bear the weight or the responsibility of something that happened to them. It's not my responsibility that they went out the way that they did. That was, to me, I believe in the many ways that was a contract that they had, with the higher power, source, spirit. Um, the reality is that that is their journey, and the only thing I can do is respect and love the time that I had with them and the experience that I had with them. And they taught me a lot that I didn't know that they taught me until circumstances and scenarios in my life presented to me, um, where I needed to implement that lesson. And coincidentally, at that same time, conversations I have with them 10 years ago interjected themselves into scenarios with another person that's completely unrelated to them. And it was such a, it was, it's been beautiful in a lot of ways in this healing process and this journey to be able to experience that.
I appreciate you sharing that,
Yeah.
and the aspect of knowing that they're okay reminds me a little bit about your conversations with your dad in the
Yeah.
car about his own friends and those beliefs that he himself had, how they helped him in his journey of grieving some of his friends dying. So, we're going to pivot, which is like that word, right? Did it not become like the most used word probably in the last 3 years as
Yeah.
everybody pivoted in their careers, pivoted? So, in this conversation, we're going to pivot into talking about your relationship with your parents and particularly with your dad and this road trip you both took and how that has completely shifted your relationship of the before the road trip relationship with dad and after the road trip. So let's talk about your relationship with your father and that day that he asked you to join him on this road trip.
Yeah. I feel like I need to lie down on a chair for a second and, where do I start?
Okay,
Um,
so let's bite sizes. Bite sizes. Tell
right.
me,
Sure.
let's do a bite sized question. You mentioned it's four of you. For in the you, it was two of you to be. Is the other two younger? We get the other two siblings younger. It's your
Yeah.
brother and you from your dad and your mom's
Yep.
marriage, and then tell me because there I kind of it throws me
Yeah.
off when you say the word brothers, and I'm like, wait, I only see one here, so
Yeah.
how about you clarify that for me first?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, my dad and mom had myself and my brother, who's a full brother, and then my dad and my mom split and ended up getting. He got remarried, and then they had two children. And so those are my half brothers. And so it's funny. I'm one of those people where people say, "Oh no, they're not my brother. They're my half brother." And I'm like, "What difference does it make? They're still your brother or your sister,
Yeah.
whether they're
Just like
half
a
or
step
full."
just like a step bro not
Yeah.
like a adoptive child would
Right.
still be your brother or your
Right.
sister.
Like
Yeah. It
you,
was
you-
just
you're
more
not.
for me was the timing of I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, here you're talking about your childhood. I see your dad would pick you and your brother up. You guys would do activities and how
Hmm.
even that dynamic shifted a little bit when he started dating and,
Yeah.
those kind of things." And so then I was trying to get that image of okay, so he has two other brothers. Now I get
Now we're
it.
all up to speed.
Now
Yeah.
we're all up to speed. So
Yeah.
you remind me the birth order of you and your brother, your
Yeah,
other
so I'm
brother,
the oldest. Yeah, so I'm
oldest.
the
Yeah.
oldest, and then I have a brother named James,
Oh, same. Okay.
who's my yeah,
So
and
same
then
as your dad. He
say
has the
yeah,
same name as
yes,
your dad.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, James, and then I have the third oldest, I guess. Yeah, the third oldest
Next.
would be Dante, and then my youngest brother is Kellen, and we are all spread out across the country. Yeah, and we keep in touch. It's nice. It's very cool.
That's
Um,
awesome. So yeah, tell
yeah,
us about your relationship with your dad and then the day he asked you to do this road trip with him.
yeah. So without going too much into the therapy chair, as I like to call it, right, and rehash all the stuff with my parents, my dad and I have always had a very interesting dynamic. And what I mean by that is, some people think interesting, like, was he off putting? Was he kind of weird? And I'm like, no. My dad and I had an interesting relationship because we are more alike than we are the same. And when I was a kid, when you're a kid and you're born into this world, the first time you open your eyes is to your mom and your dad. And when you're a young boy, who teaches you how to be a man? Majority of the time, depending on the dynamic of the relationship, it's your father. So my dad was the first man I saw when I was born, and he was the one that was around the most. And he was the one that I looked at and said, okay, this is the guy I'm supposed to emulate on how to be a man. Well, what I started noticing is that despite my dad being around, there was a little bit of an absence from from an emotional standpoint. He was very passionate about his work. He's an entrepreneur, and he loved what he did. I remember the moments that I had with him, but I always felt like there was a disconnect between us over the years, especially when I was getting hormonal in my teenage years. And, I have, floods of testosterone raging through me. And I'm like, my dad's, finding myself in these states of like, my dad's not working and he's not at all my games like I want him to be. Or when we're out and doing sporting events, as I talk about in the book, he's there, but he's texting or he's on client calls or he's like, yeah, I'll be in a second. There were a couple times I remember distinctly where I would go into the sports arena and we'd always had great seats. And I would go into the sports arena and I remember he would come in a little bit later. And it's okay from time to time when that happens because that life happens and things get into the way. But when you're a kid and you see it consistently happen, then it turns into punctuality things, then it turns into tardiness, then it turns into at times I can't pick you up from school, your mom's going to come get you, and there was no communication relayed to me. um, you start having this a little bit of disdain and this anger and resentment towards him, like I, I looked up to you and I feel like you're not emotionally there. So I don't even know if you're truly dependable. And that resentment fueled a lot of arguments and disagreements and seeking emotional validation from him to feel like I mattered because I always felt in competition with his work. It was never ever like, oh, he likes my other brother more than me. And I'm sure sometimes I was the favorite and the other times my other brothers were the favorite, right? It happens with parents. But what I do know is that it was never me being in a competition with any other human being. It was me being in competition with his work. And I felt like I could never compete. And, And my personality over the years was never so much of a projecting, lashing out. It was always an internal, like, why this? And I had a history of depression because of those things. That trauma for me was never feeling truly validated, seen, or heard by my dad. So you can imagine that as you go from this young boy who's hurt and who's scared and afraid on a lot of levels to go and joining the Marines, the first thing that he's looking for, and I'm speaking from my perspective because I am the he, is I'm looking for a male role model that's actually going to show up. And when I was 18 years old and I signed up for the Marine Corps, my dad was very proud of me, but I knew on a subconscious level that actually, Dad, you're not the guy that I was looking for. You were not the guy that I was looking for. What you actually were is the man who raised me to get to this point, to go and seek out what it truly meant to be a man. And I'm seeking that in my journey in the Marine Corps of a drill instructor. And not one of them, but three of them. And boot camp is not easy. It is not easy at all. And so imagine you having three men who could scare the living crap out of me on a day-to-day basis for 12 weeks, basically telling me, you're not enough as you are, but we're going to make you into something more. But the thing, Kendra, that I'll tell you that was really fascinating about boot camp and my father was boot camp pushed me. And those men showed up every single day. They were not late. They were always on time. And they were on my, 24/7. But they never were late. It was an easy substitution for me to say the Marine Corps was the dad I've never had. So as time goes on, I'm learning the accountability piece. I'm learning how to grow and shape and be this man. I'm going into combat. I don't need to rely on my father for any sort of emotional support at this point. I have men who have actually been shot at in combat who are telling me, you're going to be fine. This is how you're going to do. There was a nurturing aspect. When I get out, and my dad was very proud of me during my time in the military service. And I also talk about this in the book, that the moment that I got out of the military, I felt like I wore a uniform of depression and shame because I was no longer validated as a Marine. I was just a combat veteran with a mental health disorder. How could any parent be proud of that? And that's what I thought. So I go through my 20s struggling. My 20s were very difficult. I go through my 30s and start trying to carve out a piece of my life for myself. And I start noticing that right around, and I'll be 40 this year, and start noticing around the last couple years that this common theme keeps coming up. What is your father to you? What is he to you? And I couldn't answer that question. I got so like, well, what do you mean? You know what I mean? It was like meditation downloads. And as my mental health was improving, I was opening myself up to receiving more answers and guidance from, what I have named God. And as sure as many people do, like I felt like God was asking me, like, what is he to you? And as I was kind of progressing and moving through these seasons of life and being an entrepreneur, which ironically, my dad's an entrepreneur too. And I was kind of like, I'm going to go out and show him that I know what I'm doing and I didn't need him. And that was a lot of my resentment, a lot of my anger and frustration was trying to prove him wrong. So right when I'm on the cusp of having a great year of my first year in business, and I'm like, ha, I did it. I was like, now I'm going to show you, I'm going to do 2x in revenue of what I was doing before. And then COVID hit. Entire world shuts down. I'm actually in a Wim Hof retreat learning how to do breath work in March. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I'm doing my little Wim Hof here.
Oh
I do that
yeah.
sometimes before I get in the shower. I'm like,
Yeah, it's the best. It really is. And I absolutely loved it. And I remember when I came out of that retreat, I got so many downloads because for those of you who are familiar with Wim Hof and cold therapy, like your mind does not focus really on anything else except the ice cold freezing water. And then when you're in breath work and meditation, that you go really freaking deep. And I started finding out that I needed to let go of something. And maybe this was me letting go of my dad. So COVID hits. I can't get on an airplane. I get in the car and take the last I think it was like the last 2 cars from Salt Lake City, and I was living in Denver at the time, and I ended up driving back to Denver. And Kendra, I had a roughly 7-hour conversation with God. And it was like, you got to let something go. You got to make space for things. Your life's going to completely change. We're not going to tell you what it is, but just be prepared to let things go. And what ended up happening was COVID happened. I shut down and I felt myself changing and moving and started making over the course of like a 6-month decision to reflect and develop myself into the person I wanted to become. But my dad kept coming up. And then I got that phone call. And the phone call shocked me. It threw me for a loop because I was ready to tell him, F off. I don't ever want to talk to you again. I just can't. It's just too much of a battle, and my life would be better off making space for something else that was mine, that I wasn't seeking any sort of approval from you. It was all mine. But then he said, you and I haven't spent a lot of time with each other. And mind you, I didn't ask him to call me. There was no preempt to this. There was only a conversation with God at the time who basically said, we're not going to tell you how you need to let things go, but your life is going to drastically change. And this is the way they showed me. You need to have a conversation with your dad. Now, I'll wrap this up and then we can drop in because I feel like there's I feel like there's so many things you want to ask.
Oh, no, I'm just taking it in. I'm
Okay.
taking all this journey. No, no. I love to I mute myself because if not, I'll just be like,
Yeah.
oh, and then I have
Yeah.
to edit that part. So that's why I'm muted. I'm just taking it in. So continue, Mike.
No, absolutely. So he gives me this phone call and he says, you and I haven't spent a lot of time with each other. How would you like to go on a road trip with me? We'll drive from Las Vegas to Sebring, Florida. There's an automobile race I've always wanted to go to, he said, called the 12 Hours of Sebring. Now, from the time I was 10, roughly, all the way till 37 years old, 36 years old, you're telling me in the midst of the probably one of the worst years in human history for a lot of people. Some people were thriving, some people were not. You're now going to ask me to get in a car with you for 2 hours for the next week, 2 weeks, and drive across country with you, and I'm just supposed to sit next to you? What in God's name do you think we're going to talk about? And I was like, no way in hell am I going to get in a car with you, especially a Mercedes Sprinter van. If you guys don't know what that is, it's basically the vehicles that Amazon drives to drop off your packages that we order daily. That's what it is. So as I was about to have this like huge burst of energy of like, I'm going to tell him, no way, I'm not going. I hear the voice of God in my head. And I know it was the voice of God because it was the same voice that told me 6 months prior, your life is going to change. It was the one that saved me from myself in the midst of my depression when I was about to take my life. It was the one thing that told me don't go into these certain places and bad things happen. It was the same voice that told me that you probably ran over an IED and landmines more times that you can possibly count, and your time is not up yet. It was also the thing that told me that I was going to come home and be okay, but go on a journey of a lifetime. And it was not my job to ask why. It was just my job to be in it. And that was the same voice. And so what happened at this point was I hear this voice, and the voice tells me, Michael, you need to go on this trip with your dad. It's the only one that you may get with him. And I sat with that and I recognized that here's my dad in his mid 70s. We're in the middle of this pandemic. I have no clue at all how much time I have left with him. And do I really want to live the rest of my life in resentment, anger, and frustration? And if I want any answers to that, I got to go on this trip. And so I went and we spent 11 days and we talked about everything. And some of the stories if you have one that you want me to dive into a little bit before anything else. But yeah, that to me was, I hope that was a good synopsis or overview of
That
where
was
we were
a
going.
perfect synopsis. And I want to say, as I was reading this, now that I know that you're a podcaster and that you've done, now I
Yeah.
understand why you're so good at asking questions to your dad. You asked such good questions
Oh,
while you were
thank you.
driving. Really,
Yeah.
you really did ask him really good questions that really let you know who he was and really get to know more
Mhm.
about about him and connect with him in just a different
Mhm.
level than you had. So, out of those questions that you asked in that road trip, which was one that his answer surprised you the most, or that let you see this person as more than your
Mhm.
dad and really the humanity of your father? Because that, I feel that that's what this journey really allowed you to see, is your dad as a human and not just
Mhm.
as the role of dad.
So, if you remember earlier before I started my monologue, um, my dad and I are more alike than we are the same. And that's when I started to accept him and love him for where he was at. And a lot of us tolerate our parents. And I want to remind everybody here that from my perspective, tolerance does not equal love. And so it is very important for you to decide if you're contemplating in terms of, healing your relationship with your parents, or you are a parent and you find that you're in conflict with your child. One of the things that I would highly suggest to you is being able to see where the other person is at. And I think Stephen Covey has a great quote that says, "Seek to understand before you seek to be understood." And I remember that. And with my dad, what I found out was when I listened to him, when I accepted him for who he was, it doesn't mean I have to love him, but it does mean I have to accept him if I want to move forward with my life. And one of the things that I found that he said to me that really made me appreciate him as the human that he is was, "I'm so proud of you, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you enough of that." Imagine how different my life would have changed had he had said that more after all those years of feeling like that I was always in competition with his business and I was always in competition with, um, what he was trying to do.
And one of the things that really showed that connection then now is this undivided attention that you really did have with him in these
Yeah.
11 days, which was something you couldn't get from him when you were a child, because like you said, you were in competition with his
Hmm.
work and he
Yeah.
couldn't make it to games. But here you are, 11 days, really undivided attention
Hmm.
with
Yeah.
your dad and connection. And it was just such beautiful moments. And let's touch upon the part when back to kind of going back to grief, when you start asking him about his friends and their and
Yeah.
their some of them having died, and those connections and that reflection even upon of yourself. What were some of the things that your dad would say regarding his own grief journey of having lost these friends that you feel you took on for yourself as well?
I learned that death is the ultimate surrender. And I learned that in life, it is so important for you to have people to run the race with. And I've used this whole analogy thing. We were talking about it before, and I'm so glad that you picked out that passage. But for me, it's death is the ultimate surrender. And at some point in time, we're all not going to be here. We just don't know when. And grief is a completely natural part of process. It's non-dualistic. There's life and there's death, and it's the cycle, and that's the way it is. And I think my dad, what he came to grips to was the fact that his friends were with him for as long as they needed to be, for as long as they could. Um, and they passed. And he's still sad about that because those men had such a profound impact on his belief system, on his personality and his perspectives. But the most important thing I think he found was he experienced love from what he considered his brothers in Christ. He found love for himself through that and being embraced in his spirituality. And I think what he found was forgiveness. And that was the thing that I learned too on this was the intricacies and the powers of forgiveness. And it was and that was the one thing that made me really reflect on the surrender piece and also the forgiveness piece that I talk a lot about in my work and a lot of my content today is the willing to let go and forgive those and forgive yourself in order to make space to create more.
My gosh, how am I going to choose what part I use as my little promo clip at the beginning? I do not know. Because, of course, you always have something in your head that you have planned, yet it
Yeah.
doesn't always go at it because that's how life is. You've said so
Yeah.
many
Mhm.
beautiful, poignant moments. Let me ask you, in terms of your connection with your dad, because this
Yeah.
is something, how many times a week or how many times in a month would you talk to him on the phone prior to the trip? And
Yeah.
how many times do you talk to him now?
I would probably say we would talk maybe once every 2 weeks, and, we talk now probably 3, 4 times a week. We actually just talked this morning before I jumped on this podcast. And, he always laughs at me. He's like, "Hey, remember, go easy on me." He's like, "Don't beat me up too much." And I'm like, Dad, it's okay."
And I love it because he was part of the book because he writes the foreword in your
Yeah.
book. So
Yeah.
you get to see the glimpse and perspective of your dad. And he says something of like, Dad, son, if you write this, like, make sure, tell people to, what is it? Talk to their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go see their parents.
go see their parents. Yeah, that
Yeah.
emphasizes that. I love the different vulnerable moments that you share, but there's so many, but that
Mm.
experience you guys had at SpaceX and being able to witness your dad having one of
Yeah.
his child dreams come true and
Mm.
experiencing it with him, and you guys in this journey there being able to
Mm.
experience this launch. And I want to make sure that the readers, kind of experience that for themselves too. I don't
Yeah.
want to give
Yeah.
too much of that,
No,
but
right.
it is just beautiful, and I just wanna just honor you for not only
Thank you.
having shared your vulnerable story of your dynamics, but also inspiring now others to know that there is hope to heal relationships that you might feel that don't have a place in your life, because the reality is you're a different person now than you were before, and therefore the another individual could be a different person now than they were before too. So there is hope for relationships to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I would like to just share with your audience, and I know we're coming up on time here, is that one of my favorite quotes that I've heard is life presents you with circumstances and people to reveal to you where you are not free. And that quote really hit me hard on this journey because as I've heard that quote time and time again, I remember that for me, I really want to give myself the opportunity to achieve freedom in my life. Freedom from constraint, whether it be my own or from something I perceive as resistance. And what I found was, and what I have found, I should say, is that your parents are resistance for a lot of you. For at least for me, is there our parents are resistance. They keep us at times. We say, "Oh my, I can't make money because my mom has says weird things about me purchasing things, and it impacts us, and rightfully so. Our parents raised us, but there's an absolutely beautiful way to reframe this. And the way to reframe this is that you are your own entity, you're your own individual, and you have your own choices. And your parents did the best they could with what they had at the time that they had it to raise you. Whether they're limited in their beliefs or not, they're doing the best that they could and will continue to do so. If you can make space and you can forgive and love them for where they're at in that, you will be more free than you can possibly ever imagine. So I just wanted to share that with your audience is that it's never too late to have something with your parents, and it's never too late for you to experience something different with them.
Mhm. And connecting in their humanity to, like, in who they are,
Mm,
like how you did in your journey. I think that
mm,
that is one way we can
yeah.
get through. And in the things that we do have in common that are not just also just sports and this or that, but it's like, what are our regrets? What are our biggest fears? What are
Yeah.
these other big questions are also the ones we can connect with
Mm.
in a deeper level. I want to ask you, is there anything else I have not asked that you want to make sure that you add to the listeners, that you contribute to the
Um,
listeners?
Yeah, I think just the other thing is that if you want to connect with me, find out more information, and I post a lot of content on Instagram and Twitter, and I also have a lot of information about the work that I do on my website at mikeliguori.com. And then also, I'd love for anybody out there, if it interests you or you feel called to it, anybody who wants to choose to buy the book would mean a lot to me.
And we'll
This book has just been really great to see how many people have just it's impacted and lives it's changed and even conversations with their parents has changed.
Yes. And again, it's The Road Ahead and Miles Behind by Mike Liguori. And you can find it on Amazon or going to your website. You could find the link there also to go. And I'll make sure to add those right here in the profile notes. And as we kind of end, if you can please read as we're ending
Yeah.
the part on 127, in life
Hmm.
you will always, that part. I think it just wraps a lot of what your title of your of your book is.
Yeah.
Please,
No,
thank you,
absolutely.
Mike.
In life, you will always have the road ahead of you and the miles behind. It will come to you and end one day. For now, there is a bunch of highways ahead of you. They're vast and open. They can be straight or they can be full of twists and turns. You have to keep your eyes on them. Sure, it's good to reflect on the miles and the distance you've come, but don't get caught up in the rearview mirror looking back at everything, particularly the negative stuff. Don't do that with yourself, and especially don't do it with your parents. It's never too late to create something new with them. I thought it was way too late for Dad and me to have anything at all. That road trip saved us. The road taught us that we can coexist. We can be different and be the same. We can love each other. My hope is that what you will read will help you see your parents differently, like how I got to see my dad. For Dad and I, we look back at the miles we put on in our relationship and on the trip with contentment. We look forward to the road ahead, a different path. And he and I have started new and fresh, as men, as friends, as father and son.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
A bow to this conversation. And I could probably keep on asking more questions,
Well, we'll
but
have to do it again.
we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Your other book, because I think you could go deep into another book with everything also regarding
Yeah.
your marine experience. So this was one chapter of your whole probably
Yes.
line of books that you'll probably be coming up with. So and you got to do an audiobook to this
Oh, that's
because your
happening.
voice is
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Okay, your
happening. Yeah,
voice is
that's happening.
perfect, of
Oh,
course,
thank you.
for
Thank you.
your own narration. So thank you once again. This was Mike Liguori, the author of The Road Ahead and Miles Behind, and we are so happy that you're here. I am so happy, and my listeners are so grateful that you're here too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kendra.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.